Now, as you know, often in Australia, we like to say that we are the masters of things that sort of started somewhere else. For example, cricket. Not a game that we exactly invented here, kind of took it from the Poms, but we do very well at it at a national and international level. Sometimes there are slightly weirder versions, like we ended up giving a gold logie to Steve Vizard, who before he was on the Telstra board, feel free to Google that if you want. Of course, he ripped off David Letterman with his version of a talk show that looked exactly like David Letterman's. David Letterman had, of course, the top 10. He had the top 7, so it was completely different, despite the fact that even his hair ended up looking the same. And sadly, there's another thing that we are going to start to import, which is stupid acts of vandalism in the name of saving the planet, this time from the UK.
Nothing much stirs at this hour, except for the foxes. And at 2 a.m, the tyre extinguishers. Setting off to disable every 4x4 or SUV they can find.
Heroes, such heroes. Well, when we told you about that a few weeks ago, I made the not-so-bold prediction, and you know on Sundays we like a bold prediction for the week ahead, that this crap would end up happening here in Australia. And almost right on cue, somebody decided, what a wonderful idea for us to do in Australia, and they decided to take to one of the richer parts of Melbourne, being the suburb of Toorak, and the group called the Tyre Extinguishers. Yes, I'm giving them the free publicity of their name. They leave a note. And it was so kind of the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age today to give everyone the chance to print this out in full so they can do it in their own local area. Oh, no, of course, they were doing it just so you were informed on what the letter was. Among other things, the people who let down the tyres of people so they couldn't drive anywhere this Father's Day, they did this because driving around urban areas in your massive vehicle has huge consequences for others. Even if you don't care about the impacts of people far away from you, there are also consequences for your neighbours. SUVs cause more air pollution than smaller cars. SUVs are more likely to kill people in normal collisions. And psychological studies show that SUV drivers are more likely to take risks on the road. SUVs are unnecessary and pure vanity. Written by somebody who clearly doesn't have any kids or needs to move around all of the stuff that comes with the modern kid. You see, these are the spoilt kids who grew up and now attack the very cars of the parents that used to drive them to and from, presumably, I'm just going to make a guess here, private school sport on a Saturday and regattas on a Sunday. Now, of course, it's easy for them to do this in the middle of the night in a suburb that's not really going to fight back. My suggestion, though, is if they really want to start doing something, feel free to go a little further out, maybe into the western suburbs and go after tradies' utes. But you see, most of those people probably have a camera that will tell them that somebody is mucking around outside their house or has entered their own property. And I think the reaction might be slightly different and would be worth seeing on camera, as those people are told to bugger off. But another free piece of tactical advice to these people who care so much more than you or I about the planet, that if they really want to start letting down the tyres of vehicles to inconvenience people so they think twice about the impacts on the climate, there's a place called the Chinese consulate. Now, it works like an embassy in Canberra, but there's one in most, if not all, capital cities of Australia. And funnily enough, there is one in Melbourne. In fact, I've even gone to the trouble of saying the very street that they attacked, Ormsby Grove in Toorak, is a grand total of 1.1 kilometres away from the Chinese consulate in Melbourne. But just like they don't have the balls to go after the people with the tradies who would give them what for, they don't have the balls to go after the representatives of the Chinese government, which, remember, according to concerned scientists in the world, this was just updated recently, they have the biggest share of climate emissions. Australia is a little 1%, but China is what, the best part of 31%? Their representatives are 1 kilometre away, or a 13-minute walk, or a 2-minute drive from where they decided to make the man pay on the weekend. Well, let's see if you've got a pair. Feel free to go to the Chinese consulate and see what happens when you start to protest there, because there won't be a grey area about whether this is a crime or not. After all, if you truly think that the SUV owners of Toorak are the problem, you might want to read up on what China does each and every day. Remember, If Australia unplugged everything and gave these idiots what they wanted, which is for us somehow to go back to the Stone Age, because that was a much better time, wasn't it? Well, of course, Australia, everything that we produce is replaced in just 16 days by what's happening in China. But of course, China is not held to the same standards as the rest of the world. You see, we were stupid enough to sign up to a thing called the Paris Accord, which said that countries like Australia have to do something about climate change. But China can keep doing whatever the hell it wants until 2030, which means literally they can double the amount every single week until 2030, and only then it starts to count. You see, it's a developing nation because they still, intentionally, keep a very significant portion of their population in poverty. Now, developing nations generally don't have space stations, but that's what China's got. Developing nations don't generally get to hold more than one Olympics in a century, let alone 2 in the first 25 years of this century, and we're only at 2023. So if you really want to make a point, make it about China, because they're the ones currently that are truly screwing the planet.